with Jeff Harris of Reference Analog out of Moore, Oklahoma.
It's not that difficult to mount a cartridge, is it?
You know, I think that it's more that you have to know what you're doing. So if you don't know what you're doing, then it can be extremely dangerous and difficult.
That looked really simple.
Well, I've done quite a few of them.
So you have to manually move the belt to adjust the speed on this?
Or the motor. Bringing the motor closer slows it down, bringing it out farther away speeds it up. See it moving. But yeah, when you're off, the numbers move. And so when you're on, the number stays still.
Okay, so what are we going to do today, Jeff?
All right, we're gonna go over the VPI Prime and we've already got it unboxed, but I'll kind of go over just the basics of like the parts, and then we're gonna do a quick setup and kind of show you, talk about some of the different tools that you can use, talk about kind of the basics, and you know, kind of go from there. So hopefully at the end of it, you'll feel a little bit more comfortable working with a VPI. So.
Okay, so what do we need to start with?
So as you're unboxing it, there's basically just a few main parts that you're going to be unboxing. One is going to be some of their tools that they send, their alignment jig that they send, and then they actually give you a digital tracking force gauge. I use an Ortofon, but they give you one to use. You've got your belt, your tone arm, which we kind of briefly discussed a while ago, your counterweight, and your platter and your motor, and then some isolation pods that go under the feet, which have ball bearings in them with this side spiked, and then this is actually their new foam material or rubber compound, whatever, that they just implemented on their anniversary HW40 table. So this new material, basically they spent a lot of time finding it, and so now they're kind of trickling it into their other tables because they specifically found it for their HW40, but now they've got it kind of slowly trickling down into other tables.
What makes it better than other material?
So Matt, kind of the story he told me, which is kind of comical, and Matt, sorry if you don't want me sharing this stuff, but it's too late. So he said that he basically, Mike, their engineer, Mike every day had a whole row of different foams and rubbers and materials and stuff, and he had a pair of headphones on, and he had a little ping hammer and was going down them, hitting the different materials. And Matt said for weeks he just watched this engineer he's paying use a little hammer hitting materials, and finally he was like, Mike, what are you doing? And he's like, well, I'm looking for, you know, a new compound to be able to use in the feet, and that will help, you know, distribute the vibrations and cut down on, you know, vibrations and isolate better. And so after, you know, there's no telling, I don't know how much time he actually used, I'll say weeks, but after weeks of trying different, you know, materials and listening for how they sounded when you hit them with the vibration, and then obviously, you know, having to test them on the actual products, not just with hammers, but they found this material, and this material has basically been like, you know, I don't know if you've seen, they put out a video that's called the bottle test, and Harry, basically they've got a turntable playing the HW40, and Harry takes a bottle and starts slamming it on the table beside the turntable, and the table plays perfect. It doesn't skip, it doesn't do anything, you know, and Harry kind of attributed that to the new feet design that they came up with. So
interesting.
Yeah, so just like everything, material science pretty much. But so going back to the table, you've got the platter, which has a hole and will have a piece of tape over it. You'll need to take off the tape, and the bearing will have a cap over it. You'll need to take that off, and then you basically fit it together and just make sure that it goes down in the hole, and then you'll want to gently lower it. You don't want to drop the platter onto the bearing because you'll dent it, and then you'll be calling VPI.
Oh no.
So you want to gently lower it down onto its bearing. Then you've got the motor pod, power cord, and you'll basically set it to the side under, just kind of under the rim of the platter. And that will not fit under the platter if you don't have your pods under your feet. And then your belt, basically, belts are kind of the vein of everyone's existence here, but you basically work it around and then hook it.
And it goes onto the motor there.
It goes onto the motor there. And you've got two different areas in your pulley. You've got a bigger area on the bottom, which is for 45s, and basically you just move it. And then when you start your motor, it actually will move on the platter to kind of position itself correctly.
Oh.
And then you've got your 33 area, which is kind of the top area. And these are stepped pulleys, so the different steps are slightly different speeds. So I believe it's as you go down, they get slightly slower as you go down on the pulley.
And you have to manually move the belt to adjust the speed on this.
Or the motor. Bringing the motor closer slows it down. Bringing it out farther away speeds it up. So.
Interesting.
Yep.
So how do you know you have it just right? You must have to really
listen. Some people will actually, if they don't have the tools, they will put on a CD that has the correct pitch, and then they'll take an album that they have of the same thing and they'll try to match the pitch, because with speed, you know, if you are going too fast, it's going to be a little bit too high pitched. It's going to, you know, sound a little bit like, if you ever try to play a 33 at 45, it's like, sounds like chipmunks. So your pitch actually varies with its speed. So anyway, so they try to match that. But if you don't have that, there's iPhone apps that you can put on the platter and turn it on and it registers speed, or there's like the KAB speed strobe, and you know, I'll show you briefly how strobe works. And you hear the squeak and stuff. That squeak is completely normal. That's the belt, the small amount of surface area of that belt having to start up a 20-pound platter. So it takes a lot of friction. So it's completely normal. If you would like to reduce that, you can basically take a little bit of baby powder and take the belt off and kind of dip it in baby powder, and then put the belt, shake off the excess and put the belt back on. Then it will get rid of that. But basically, this KAB has a bunch of numbers and they say the speeds on them. But when you shine the strobe onto it, that speed should stay still at like 33. Or if you do 45. And this one's a little bit different. Most of them that you see, there's just lines, and you're looking for the lines to stop moving. On this one, it's numbers instead of lines. But see, we're a little bit slow on the 45. So anyway, we'll have to adjust it when we get there. But
okay, so it actually, you could see.
You could see
I want to get that one.
You could see it moving. But yeah, when you're off, the numbers move, and so when you're on, the number stays still. So we're just a little bit off on speed. Wow. So we could adjust it, but anyway.
Can you play 78s on this?
No, you cannot.
Okay.
Anyway, and then what you basically have with a strobe disc is it kind of, all of them essentially kind of look like that, except for there's ones with just lines, and then there's ones with numbers and different variations of ones out there. But
interesting. Okay.
You also will want to have your motor warmed up, because right now it's not the best time for us to check speed because we just plugged this motor in, and so you'll want to let the motor warm up a little bit before you check speed, because it will change slightly as it kind of warms up. Because like I said, we just plugged it into the wall from the box. So, but that's essentially how to check speed. And like I said, for people who don't have, like, this is about $100 item. For people who don't have that, then they can get an app on their phone and kind of do it, or just, you know, do it by ear if they would like. So VPI includes a record mat. I think this black version that they've got going now looks super nice and classy. I don't use it to put my records on. I don't think it sounds that great. I do like it as a dust cover though. So I go directly on the platter, so directly on the metal. It is completely safe. It doesn't hurt your records, and most VPI owners go directly on the metal. I use this as a cool dust cover. So that way I keep my platter dust free. And when I go to play a record, I just pull it off and slide it under the turntable. So when we're setting up the cartridge, we're going to want to do it without the mat because I'm not going to be using a mat when I'm playing a record.
Okay.
You want to kind of start off leveling the turntable. We're on a kitchen table right now, so we're not going to probably find exact level. But I like to use instead of a little round bubble level, I like to use a normal plastic 8-inch or whatever level. And I like to go at 2 angles, this way and this way. And if you're level at both those angles, then you're going to be level. So I like doing it directly on the platter, not the turntable plinth, because the platter is what is the actual surface that you're going to be playing off of. And then before we get started, you kind of lock down your platter a little bit. I don't always lock down the platter because I'm pretty used to, doing it. But also my protractor that I've got goes down into the turntable bearing, and so it kind of locks itself into place anyway. But for you guys out there, get a couple like little rubber wedges and just slide them under the platter, and it will kind of keep the platter from moving. So
Yeah, I've seen people put cardboard under.
yeah, these wedges, I don't remember exactly where I got them, but they were like 20 cents. So, you can find them, they're out there. If you use wedges on a different table that has a lightweight platter, be mindful not to lift your platter, because with a super lightweight platter, you can actually end up just tilting your platter up, and it kind of defeats what you're trying to accomplish.
Okay.
VPI gives an alignment jig. The way that this alignment jig works is it goes on the spindle, and then it goes up against the housing for the bearing, or for the turntable spike, the male bearing, I guess. And then you can set it back on there, and then you'll be able to use that to set your angles.
Okay.
And overhang. I use a different one. This one works perfectly well. There's really no need for you to buy other tools. You can completely do your setup with the stuff that VPI gives you. I like using the acoustical system Smart Tractor because I can use this on any turntable, and I set up a lot of different tables. Guys fly me around to do turntable setup, and so I need to be able to have a little bit of universal tools. And this one allows you to set it via the pivot to spindle distance. And on this size arm, the pivot to spindle should be 258, which it looks like VPI is accurate on where they drilled the plinth. So that's good, or the arm board. Which basically I'll drop
And
that in.
this is where we're seeing it right here, where the arrow is.
Yeah, so it's basically 250, 260, and then there's 2 little lines back, so 258.
Okay.
And they give you some other lines and little numbers down here that really allow you to get completely locked in. So whenever you're doing like an Avenger, you actually have to set up the pivot to spindle distance on an Avenger yourself. You can do that with basically, anything that's got up to 300 millimeter length. But the 12-inch arm is about 299 or 300. Generally, you want to shoot for about 300. So that's what their arm technically calls for. So on the pivot to spindle.
Okay.
So take this back off though, and we're going to do a couple other things first. But now that I've kind of shown you that, we can move on. Come back to it when we use it. Alright, so at this point we're going to want to get the actual cartridge out. And in this case we're using an airtight PC7.
I cartridges.
Yeah, they make some great sounding cartridges. Very lifelike and musical and very detailed. And there's a lot of great cartridges out there though. So if you can't afford an airtight, don't feel like you can't have great sound. Because there are a lot of really, really nice cartridges on the market.
It's not that difficult to mount a cartridge, is it?
I think that it's more that you have to know what you're doing. So if you don't know what you're doing, then it can be extremely dangerous and difficult. So
that looked really simple.
well, I've done quite a few of them. A lot of people say don't use your fingers when putting on the leads. I have some big old paws, so if I can do it, you can do it. But there's also tools to be able to be able to easily put those on. Nasotech has one that it's a pair of tweezers that have a opening, and I'll show them to you in just a second. Once I get this on here, I'll grab it out of my toolbox. But the Nasotech ones, they allow you to grab them without actually pinching it down. So, they make it kind of handy for people that don't have, as steady of hands and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And technically I could lower this down, but, just to kind of let it hang, but I'm not going to for the video purposes and stuff, because the wires are stout enough that you're not going to destroy them by gently letting it sit. You wouldn't want to do that without a stylus guard on, but and I don't know how long of screws I've got here, but we'll see. And everything in analog is kind of back and forth, trial and error, so make sure you're in a decent mood.
Well, that's kind of like cooking, right? If you're in a bad mood, then your food's going to turn out bad.
Right. Move that one out because we're going to need it. So VPI gives you a couple different size screws, but you'll just kind of depends on the cartridge. Their finger lift, the screws actually go through their finger lift, so just remember to put the screws through there, otherwise you will finish your setup and go, dang, I forgot to put that on. And you'll have to take it back off. So let me grab the pair of tweezers and
Okay.
I'll show you those. So these are made by a company called Nasotech, but if you can see, they basically have a round opening in the tweezers that grab on. I'll let you come back over to the side.
Let me see that real quick.
Okay, that grab on to the leads and don't crush them down. If you find that your leads are too tight, a round toothpick, just kind of stick it down in the hole of the lead and it'll loosen it up a little bit. And then to tighten them back down, you can kind of use your toothpick as a gauge and stick it down in there a little bit and then squeeze them down with a different set of tweezers that's not really meant to squeeze them down, that's meant to be gentle with them. So
Yeah, I'm trying to get my camera to focus in on it.
but
Well, they can kind of see what it...
yeah, and I don't really like using normal like pliers or tweezers or anything with the head shell leads because I find that it just basically tears up the covering, and so I like to use either my fingers or something like this.
Okay. You're gonna switch places?
Yep.
Okay.
Alright, so now that we've got the cartridge on there, let's see where our lift is at and our weight. So we're way heavy right now. I can tell by picking it up that we're going to be way heavy. So this is your vertical tracking force. That's closer, but I'm betting that we're still a little heavy.
And how are you making the adjustment over here?
So there's this little thumb screw on top that you loosen and tighten, and when you loosen it, you're able to move it back and forth, and when you tighten it, it kind of locks it in place. But with VPI arms, it's a drop counterweight, so what you have to remember is when you're moving it back and forth, you're setting vertical tracking force. So, but when you move it like this, you're setting azimuth. So it's one piece that does two adjustments. So once we kind of get a little closer to being dialed in, you'll see me really start kind of holding everything tight and making minute adjustments rather than just being willy-nilly with it. So right now though, I don't really want to set up a cartridge with too much tracking force because I'll, possibly ruin the suspension on the cartridge. So what I try to do initially is just kind of get it to where it's somewhat close or possibly light, and this is going to be on the light side. So we want to get a little bit heavier than that. And then make sure that our lift is going to be able to lift it, which it is clearing it, so we're going to be good there. And throw on a stylus tracking force gauge. Oh, I got it locked down. Forgot. So anyway, we'll see where we're at.
How does it, is it just detecting that it's there? What is,
Yeah, it'll just detect that it's there.
oh, I see, you're placing it right there, I see.
Let's see. Alright, yeah, and like I kind of thought, we're really light. We're at like 0.61 grams. So I'll have to look up to see exactly what this cartridge calls for, but generally around 2 grams is what most cartridges are. So for setup, we'll kind of get it close to 2, and
Okay.
then we'll kind of do our setup. Yeah, so 1.93 right there. So we'll stick at that for the setup, because as we move the cartridge back and forth in the head shell, it will actually change the tracking force a little bit. So there's no point in getting like crazy with the number right now, because it's going to change as we do the setup. So
Do you need all of these tools? If, say you're someone who's not a professional setup.
the tools that VPI includes can do a setup. So they include the stylus gauge and a protractor and a little coffee straw to try to help you visualize your azimuth. So there's a little notch to put it on the head shell, and then when you put it on your table, you can kind of look at the straw and try to visualize level or not.
I see.
I use a laser, a self-leveling laser, and to kind of do starting angles. So that's kind of what I use to get started. And it makes for a nice, easy experience. Let me raise this up a little bit because it's kind of pushing down that bearing. So I'm going to utilize this. Just a second. So with unipivots, there's a few things that can make it kind of want to skate on you when you're doing the setup. One being the wire, and two being whenever you're using this style of protractor, you got to be accurate down in the hole or it'll try to skate on you. So let's see if it skates now. Alright, now we're good. So, I'm going to take my laser and just kind of glance to get us somewhat close with VTA and azimuth. That way I'm working from at least a somewhat close to squared up perspective. So we'll need to come down some. I'm going to lift it up just to do that. Loosen your 2 set screws on the sides of the VTA tower. And then you'll be able to see back here the laser kind of move into the middle of the tone arm a little bit. Alright, so that's pretty close to level now. So I'm able to find level pretty easily and quickly with the laser, which I like, because I like to kind of do every setting at least with a kind of squared up perspective of level and the cartridge level.
And if you're not using the laser, you'd use the straw.
You would use the straw and a little bit of your eyeball. So, and then there's also tools. I'm gonna twist this to adjust my azimuth just a little bit. And I'm kind of doing multiple stages right now. Some guys do everything at once and or do the full setting and then they come back and do each thing. I kind of like to do a quick setup with the laser, and then I can come back. All right, so the head shell is squared up on this end. Turn this off and set it to the side. Another thing that you could do is they've got little acrylic blocks. This one's made by Nasotech. That's got a level in it, and it's got the lines to be able to see. The only catch with the lines in this type of thing in general is you're sitting it down beside your tone arm, and so it's a little bit scary at times because if they fall over, you know, it falls over on your stuff. But if you want to kind of look, I don't know if you can or not, but you can see the lines on there because it's, you know, marked. And you can tell if your table's level, which this is not level right now because like I said, we're on an actual kitchen tabletop. So, anyway, so you can work with that. And then on your head shell, you can do the same. Kind of sit it on the head shell, and you can square up your head shell with this type of tool.
The head shell?
Well, I mean the front. So you look from the front, and that's your azimuth, is that motion side to side. And then from the side, you're looking at VTA.
Okay,
which is up and down. So I like to start everything squared up. Generally, if you don't have tools or software, that's pretty much all you can do is square it up, and then listen. And your final step is always your ears. So you're, you know, whenever you're working from just a level position, you generally are going to use your ears to find if you've done a good job or not. So what I would do is I would take everything, I would square everything up, make it all level, and then listen to it and then adjust slightly up and down on your VTA.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then listen, and then adjust, and then listen, and then adjust, and then listen. And eventually you'll kind of find what you like. So now we'll come back. Now we know that our tracking force is at least in the ballpark, and we're squared up on the, you know, head shell and leveling of the arm. So now we can look at where it falls for overhang, and we're a little bit short. So raise it up, move it back to its holder. And then I generally grasp from the sides and I hold the cartridge body and the tone arm. I like to feel both of them so I can feel like the movements that are taking place. And I generally do not tighten up super tight, so I leave one loose and I just kind of snug the other one just a little bit. That way when I'm making adjustments, I'm not like tightening all the way and then unloosening all the way and then tightening all the way, because you're going to have to make small adjustments as you go. And those small adjustments are difficult with a completely loose cartridge.
What exactly is the overhang?
So the overhang is where the stylus is falling. So it'll be easier to show you on VPIs. So when you're setting overhang, you're essentially trying to get the stylus to hit that exact white dot. So like exact. So with the acoustical systems, that dot is actually a divot, and so you can actually feel it kind of fall into the divot when you've got it correct. On this and on most other alignment jigs, that is not. It's a painted dot generally. So, but the goal is to get the stylus to fall directly on that, and then we'll work on the angle, and the angle is essentially going to be making the cantilever directly parallel with the lines. So when you're perfect, that middle line should disappear behind your cantilever, and these lines should be completely perfectly parallel to your cantilever. So you'll know that your exact, well, it'll actually be like this, but you know, you'll get the hint. You'll see that your cantilever basically disappears, or your line basically disappears behind the cantilever, and you'll know that you're exactly straight. And if you're exactly straight with that line and your stylus is exactly on the dot, then you're set up and good to go with that aspect of things. So we need to come out a little bit more, and as far as angle, we're looking pretty good, so I'm going to want to keep it pretty close to the angle that it's at, except for bring it out just a little bit more. And it's all very small adjustments. So that's why I say, you know, be in a good mood and take your time. And some guys might try to loosen over here. I think that's a horrible idea.
On which part of it?
When setting it up, they might just try to hold here and then loosen while they're here. Every adjustment that I make, I come back to the holder.
Sounds like a safer option.
Right. And some of the cartridges that we deal with, I mean, there's, you know, Airtight's got one called the Opus, so that's, you know, $15,000. And so when you're setting up a $15,000 cartridge, you want to have good practices, you know, in place. And so I pretty much set up, you know, every cartridge exactly the same. So no matter what it is, it pretty much, I'm doing the same thing. So we're gonna have to kick the back that way just a touch. And the overhang is really close. It's not perfect yet, but it's so close that I'm not positive which direction to move it right this second. So I'm thinking that what we will do is kick the back a little bit where we need it to go, and we'll see where our overhang lies. Sometimes, you know, when you've got something else that you've got to adjust, go ahead and adjust it and see where your other one falls. And sometimes it falls perfect. So setting up a cartridge is literally a back and forth process. So and now I can tell that we got to come this way just a little bit, and that's the thing, is you want to slowly eke in on where your final results are going to be. So it's important to have good control of your cartridge movements so that you're not just starting over every time. You're actually slowly working toward results. All right, and we went a little bit too far.
Which way?
We got to go back this way a little bit. So, make the adjustment. And, going back and forth, I think also kind of helps lets you guys see that, this isn't even when you do a lot of them. I mean, I do, at least probably five turntables a week, and it takes time to do it right. You can throw a cartridge on a table in a very short amount of time if you don't care about being exactly accurate. Which is why some of the inexpensive tables, you actually can make them sound a little bit better by doing a good setup on them, because they were most likely, a cartridge was kind of thrown on there, if you will, just for time management and etc. Alright, so we are really close, but I think we can go a little bit better. Just a little bit too far, like toward me, so I got to back up just a little bit, but our angles are still looking really good, so trying to just maintain our angle and get the overhang right. And guys, sometimes you'll get lucky and throw a cartridge on there and it'll fall perfect and all the angles will be perfect and you'll go, oh my gosh, I did it. And you almost want to adjust it because you in your mind you're thinking, how could that be perfect? But trust what you see. You did a good job, you did a good job. And I've done a lot of cartridges where I've taken the cartridge off the guy's table that he put on, and he asked how close he did, and a lot of times guys nailed it. So it just takes time and patience. So we'll go back a little bit more. What I'm looking at from the side is I'm trying to see where that stylus is falling at. And right now it looks like it's falling just a little bit beyond the dot. And since this is a divot, not just a painted line or a painted dot, I can actually see that it's not down in the divot or falling down in there. But my lines are pretty solid still. And depending on the light that you have, a lot of people will use flashlights, and I generally try to generally reducing the light in the room actually helps. A lot of people want to put like a spotlight on there for you, but you really need the light where you want the light. And so I generally take my phone, for instance, and I shine it from the back, and that way you can really see what's going on, and it lights everything up for you. Then you can do it from the side. Just kind of make it work for you. Again, I said that I thought that we were just a little bit beyond, right? Yep. And of course, when the audio bell is recording me, it takes forever. But that's part of it. Sometimes it takes a little longer. And that's okay. The key is accuracy, not a matter of time. Twist it just a touch.
This reminds me of a bicycle maintenance class I took where I had to rebuild my hubs on my bicycle, and it was either when you're rebuilding it you get it perfect, or you're constantly having to tweak it back and forth until you get just the right amount of play.
That's pretty much it. That's pretty much it. All right. And if you guys notice, whenever I come back over here, it looks like I'm almost doing nothing because the movements are so small that if you question if you moved it or not, just check where it's at, because if you have to check, then you probably did. And it doesn't take but a second to throw it over here and see what's going on with it so that you can make your next move. People used to try to align by the body of the cartridge, and the body of the cartridge is generally not like the optimal thing to align with. You want to use the cantilever itself. So anyway, that's the reason why when you look down the thing, you're looking at the cantilever. And I can show you on this thing again real quick.
Yeah.
So
Sorry if that looked a little bit blurry, everyone.
Okay. Do you need to trade spots with me?
I can just show you from here. I just don't know. So essentially what you're looking at, this is your cantilever and the tip of it is your stylus. You're looking at your stylus to fall directly on that dot. And when that's your overhang, so you want it to be exactly on the dot. And then you want your cantilever, you want to rotate it to where you're exactly covering up that line and it's exactly parallel to your other lines.
Okay.
So that's essentially what you're going for. And as you saw, it takes a little bit of time and it's back and forth and back and forth. And so now that we've got that part done technically, we want to move it back and tighten it up. And then this is when you get really mad at yourself if you mess it up trying to tighten it. So just hold the cartridge and the head shell together, you know, and tighten it. And I basically just go to really snug, if you will. So these 3D printed tone arms, you can break the head shell if you try to like just wrench them like crazy. So I get to where they're really tight, but I'm mindful about how tight I'm going. And then double check and make sure you're still good. And luckily we are, so we can move on. So now that we've got the angles in the cartridge done, we can look at our azimuth. And I like to use a record to put on there for VTA and azimuth. I'm sorry about the noise there. Hopefully didn't deafen you guys. So I throw a record on, and I want to say that this one's around 180 gram. So anyway, and kind of go back to the laser and see where it all sits. Make sure that we're going to be lifting high enough, and when we lower, make sure that we are lowering low enough. If for some reason it is not lifting it high enough and you have to make an adjustment, on a VPI they send you 2 Allen wrenches. The bigger one is for your cartridge screws. The smaller one is for stuff like that. So you use the smaller Allen wrench, and if you loosen it, you can push up or down on this lift. And you don't want this right now where it's at when you do that. You'll want to kind of see how far you need to move it and then make the adjustment from there. So just loosen it, adjust it a little bit, and tighten it back up. And it doesn't need to be, you know, He-Man tight. Everything is basically just snugged up well. So
Does it look like it needs to be adjusted?
no,
Okay.
because it's lifting and it's lowered as far as the appropriate heights. So, and if you get to the point that you have raised it as high as it'll go and it's still not picking the cartridge up off the record, you can actually adjust the female bearing in the tone arm itself, which takes a fairly large Allen wrench, but you'll want to take your tone arm off and the Allen wrench goes straight down in, and you can make that female bearing go down or up, and that's where the actual spike is sitting on or in, and so that will change the relation for this and allow your lift to be able to work. And then you'll have to adjust your VTA. So, but we're not going to have to make that adjustment. So generally you don't. Sometimes it's just one of those things. Sometimes you have to.
And you want the VTA by definition to be 92 degrees?
And be mindful of your wires, because sometimes they hit first, and so you want to make sure they're not hitting first. or at all really. So that's your stylus rake angle is 92 degrees.
Okay.
And really the only way to check that is with the USB microscope. So anyway, I have a USB microscope. I use it when customers are wanting to have it done. I'll give you a picture of one of the ones that I've done, and with the USB scope, and you can kind of let everybody see.
Okay.
But kind of go back to my laser now that we're on an actual record and see where we need to be. So we're just a touch high in the back, which honestly is probably going to sound good. Generally up in the back just a little bit. Generally sounds pretty nice. You can lower it a little bit to get it level, or you can leave it there. Right now we're going to leave it there because I think that's kind of where we're going to end up at. And then for the azimuth, so this is a test record and this is what I use it for. So anyway, nobody yell at me about putting the block on the actual record surface.
What are you doing?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm looking to see how squared up I had it with the laser a while ago, and making sure that we're still good. So we're still squared. So
Great.
the only way really to adjust this with beyond any accuracy other than just making sure things are level is to use like a tool like the phosgometer, or a tool like the Analog Magic software. And the Analog Magic software basically you use a computer program that gives you the distortion levels in each channel, and based on those channels distortion levels you adjust your azimuth. But when you adjust azimuth, you also have to look at your VTA. When you adjust VTA, you kind of have to relook at your azimuth. So it's kind of a back and forth thing. So when I'm doing a setup, in a customer's house, I generally use the software, the Analog Magic software. It's fairly expensive though, and you have to buy a computer and whatnot. So I generally tell people that it's, they're welcome to buy it, but if you're not doing a cartridge like all the time, it's pretty expensive just to do your own cartridge.
How much is it?
Off the top of my head, I want to say it's around $650 or so just for the software.
Wow.
And then you've got to buy a PC. So, by the time you throw in a cheap PC, and you have to buy a digital interface, phono stage, so it goes out USB. So by the time it's all said and done, you're probably looking at a little over $1,000 just for the software to be functional. And then the phosgometer you can basically use without having any fancy software. You've got to have an analog, test album, which this one is an Analog Production Ultimate Analog Test LP. And basically track 1 is mono, and track 2 and 3 represent right and left channels. And based on where you're at, whenever you're playing the mono, it'll be at 0, and then whenever you play one of the other channels, track 2 or 3, your needle moves into a position, and you want them to be exactly the same. So your goal, you make adjustments to make them exactly the same.
Is this one of Jim Fosgate's designs?
So and this is distributed by Musical Surroundings, and they've got dealers, obviously, like myself, all over the country. So, and since we're not completely level with the turntable, we will kind of do that kind of stuff once we get it onto the shelf, because it's going to be a little bit difficult for us to get like really accurate readings on an unlevel surface like this. So without leveling, the turntable, but we've already kind of maxed out the feed. So for trying to level on this table. So
Okay.
you generally want to start, I generally tell people start with their actual platform level and then work from there. Because then you're making a small adjustment with the turntable rather than a big adjustment with the turntable. So, but so let's see. We've discussed the azimuth and VTA and setting the cartridge up. I generally don't suggest with anti-skate. I generally don't suggest the wire twist method. I personally feel like it torques the arm sideways whenever you're doing it that way, and for me, that messes up your azimuth. So I generally say for guys not to do that. Just make sure you got a nice loop in there, and that'll be perfect. VPI gives you your anti-skate device. We briefly talked about it in one of the other videos, but I generally use the Analog Magic software to set the anti-skate. If you're hearing distortion in one of your channels, you might go ahead and utilize the anti-skate. With VPIs, most of the time, I think it sounds a little bit better without the anti-skate, so I generally don't use it. But you know, physics is physics, so you want to at least kind of look into it. But you know, once you're done, if you hear, you know, once you get that on there and stuff, if you're still hearing distortion, you need to go back and check your alignment with your alignment jig for your cartridge, because you shouldn't have distortion once you're playing records. So at least with a new cartridge and stuff like that, as you wear your cartridge out, you know, you'll start kind of picking up sibilance and you know, in the like female vocals or high frequencies and stuff, and then you might even pick up some distortion. And generally, those are kind of signs that your cartridge is kind of, you know, edging toward its lifespan. So you might want to start, you know, looking into replacement or retipping.
So for a moving magnet, how do you know if it's the stylus or the cartridge?
Generally, it's just going to be the stylus. Whenever you pull that off, most of the stuff that you're, you know, worried about, it replaces. So yeah, you should be fine just replacing the stylus on the moving magnet, because it's kind of the whole front body of the cartridge. It's not just, you know, you don't actually grab onto like the cantilever and pull it out. It's the whole front body of the cartridge that pulls off.
Oh, okay. So you're pretty much rebuilding it then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I did have a couple of questions. So you had just replaced the cartridge on my friend Mike's turntable, and you replaced his with a Ortofon, what was it, a quintet?
Yeah, I think we did a quintet black on Mike's, if I remember correctly.
But you had taken apart his turntable and put it back together, and you noticed that the belt was kind of a little bit loose, so you did some type of trick.
So with the rubber belts, generally you can kind of regain some of their elasticity, so kind of make them a little bit smaller and by boiling them. And it also gets rid of some of the impurities that have built up on the belt as far as oils and dirts and stuff like that. And so generally whenever I'm kind of doing a maintenance on a table, I will boil the belt for, you know, just a few seconds really, and kind of try to get some of those impurities off the belt and kind of make it have some, you know, get some of its stretch back into it. So
for those of you who feel like you need to replace your belt, maybe you just need to boil it.
Yeah, maybe boil it for a few seconds, and you know, it's not a new belt by any means, but it does kind of do the trick for you know, extending its life a little bit. So, and then whenever you maintenance these, you know, basically you got to take once every year or 2 years, you want to take off the platter and kind of clean up that bearing and wipe off some of the excess grease and stuff. And then VPI sells some Magic Lube, I think is what they call it. But it's essentially kind of a high-grade lithium grease, and you want to put just a dollop on that bearing, and then you can put your platter back on and kind of move it, spin it a little bit, kind of let it get seated a little bit. Sometimes it's a pretty tight tolerance, so sometimes the platter won't go all the way down, and you might have to pull it back off and wipe off some of the excess because you might have got a little bit too much, and sometimes it kind of binds it because of the tight tolerances. And then the motor itself, there's a little hole in the top of the spindle, and you can take a toothpick and some motor oil and just kind of take the toothpick and dip it in the motor oil, and then you can drop like drops instead of it being like, how do I pour a drop, you know? You can get a couple drops and just kind of put them down in the top of the spindle, and they'll slowly seep down into the motor where you want them to be.
Okay.
So you don't have to necessarily take it all apart. You can kind of do it from the outside, and it'll work its way down in there and do its thing. So, and if you're, you know, if you do your maintenance, then it should be, you know, a good table for years and years and years. And even if you don't do your maintenance, you know, it doesn't take a whole lot to fix it. So, you know, there's only a few things that need to be fixed whenever, you know, guys don't maintenance them. But there's tables out there that have been out there for 20 years that guys didn't maintenance and they're still running fine, you know. So it's just best practice. Keep the distortion levels low, and with, you know, vibrations and stuff like that. So
Okay, well, so I had one other question. I know some turntables, they come with dust covers, some of them come separately, some of them they don't make dust covers for at all. And then I'll see audiophiles that listen to the music with the dust covers on, and then audiophiles that listen to it with the dust cover up. So what do you think about that?
Just like everything in audio, there's always somebody to debate something. And there's been probably every sentence that I've said in this entire video, somebody will have something to say about. So the audio society, it's funny in that sense that everybody's got a strong opinion about things. The dust cover world, so generally they say that with dust covers on, there's resonances and stuff happening inside the dust cover when you're playing a record, and that those can interfere with your pickup, and then that the dust cover itself, you know, has a vibration to it. And, you know, so generally for audiophile listening, people say to take the dust cover off altogether. Most VPIs don't come with a dust cover. The HW40 does, and Matt actually, you know, has said for ultimate listening, you want to probably just take the dust cover off. But a lot of people love dust covers because, you know, you got a high value piece of equipment, and housemaids don't clean under dust covers. So it protects it a little bit. You know, for me, generally what I do is, like I said, I throw the mat on there, and that acts as my dust cover. And every blue moon, I'll kind of slowly clean up the turntable, being ultra mindful of my stylus. This type of cover for your stylus is pretty easy to work with. It essentially just kind of slides on there. Some of them are not as easy to work with. So I generally don't use the stylus guard. If you've got pets or kids or something that you're worried about, then you'll probably need to use the stylus guard. And most of them you get used to and familiar with how they work, and so, you know, you can do it without damaging your stylus. But a lot of times I would just rather not be fiddling with the cartridge all the time, and so
Yeah,
I leave it off
want to.
generally. If you ever feel like, so with a unipivot arm, these should move in all directions pretty well. If you ever end up kind of weird like that, or just something's off and it won't pivot well, like that right there, we're kind of bound, right? It's not moving gently. You're not in the bearing. So just reposition it, and then you're good. So that's something that people sometimes run into. And we actually, I mentioned that we actually do need to go back and look at our tracking force. You know, I can do that after the video, but because we just briefly said it at the beginning. But now that everything is set and the cartridge is set in the head shell where it's going to go for the overhang,
We'll go check that
now
again.
we can go back to the stylus force and see where we're actually at on it, and then slowly adjust that. And we'll adjust that with this knob. And you know, like I said, I didn't want to really adjust azimuth too much on this unlevel surface, so we'll do that more, you know, when we get to where we're going to put the table. But whenever you're finally kind of doing your final settings, you'll want to kind of, I hold back here and I hold up here, and I kind of hold everything in place whenever I'm listening. And so that way I can kind of have control of the weight. and then I very minutely edge it kind of where I need it to go, and then tighten it back down. Because if you just kind of loosen it, you're going to mess up every setting that you've done on azimuth and tracking force.
Oh,
so,
yeah, that would be a hassle.
yeah, you got to kind of maintain control of that drop counterweight. So,
You know, it was funny. In another video, we were talking about how Jeff and his business, a lot of the times people will hear about it through word of mouth, and that's kind of how I heard about him. I went to a Magnapen 30.7 listening event a couple of years ago, and at the listening event, I met an audiophile named Lewis, who happened to know Jeff, and then Lewis introduced me to Jeff over email, and then I introduced Jeff to Mike as far as his business goes, and then now Mike has had his cartridge replaced by Jeff, and here I am doing a video with him on the VPI Turntable setup and just talking about his business in general. So,
yeah, it's a lot smaller industry on the professional side than what people realize. Sometimes like dealers actually sometimes talk to each other, because if I've got a customer, that's calling me, and I know that my buddy who's a dealer in Dallas or whatever has had the same customer talking to him, I'll call, or my buddy will call me and be like, hey, has this guy called you? And we'll kind of discuss it. It's a smaller community than what I think people realize. And so even on the, the manufacturer side, all the manufacturers are pretty much friends, and, all, mostly get along, and, it's a hobby, and we all enjoy sharing this together. And so, it's a small industry, and, everybody kind of eventually finds each other, and
yeah.
So
exactly. And so we're about to go and get the rest of this setup, and then I'm going to actually get to listen to it. After seeing it, I've decided I'm going to buy it, and as well as this airtight cartridge, which I heard the airtight cartridge at Rocky Mountain a couple of years ago, and this particular turntable I have not heard yet, but I can tell that it's leagues above the one that I have, so but I still have to listen to it to gauge that. But
yeah, so we're gonna get that final setup done over there. But I just want to show one more thing. So this one's got a clamp, a screw-on clamp, instead of just like the HRX weight. So it's got a little rubber piece that this is meant to go under the record. And so if you put that on and pretty much leave it in place, then you can put your record on. And then when you take your clamp screws down, and when it screws down, it actually kind of locks the record to the edge of the platter. And so you don't want to over tighten it, so don't just keep cranking it. Basically, when you get it to where you feel it snug, just go just a touch more, and that's all you need. I've actually had people tighten it down so much that it actually starts bowing the record, and then you run into other issues with, now you've got a warped record with a bow, and so you want to just go to where it starts getting snug, and then go a little bit more, and you'll be perfect. So
sweet. Okay.
Yeah. All right, we ready to get the other part set up?
I think so. Thank you so much for doing the setup for everyone.
Yeah, and hopefully everybody learned a little bit, and if you've seen it done different or do it different yourself, that's completely fine. There's multiple ways to get your end result, and and like I said, this was kind of a basic video with some of the tools that I use. It's not utilizing the software and some of the more technical stuff that we use, but at least maybe this will give you enough confidence that you can go home and set your own table up if you desire to, and or call somebody like me, and I'd be happy to come out and do it. So anyway.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.